Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road, where today's guests are Marisa Hanlon and her son, Jonathan Brown. You'll remember that Marisa shared with us a three-part story that was just mind-boggling on a testimony that was a roller coaster ride of addiction and sobriety and addiction, and then finally, tremendous consequences. Today you get a picture of what restoration and reconciliation look like. God loves to redeem, to buy back, to reconcile, to bring peace, and to restore, to make us new again, and then use us to make others new again. Today's story is a picture of a family of reconciliation, bought back by the redemption of Christ and made new again. Marisa and Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us today. Marisa, I'm so happy you came back. You're like the most watched three-parter ever in history of the Restoration Road. And we want to talk about your relationship as mother and son and how you were disconnected and then how you reconnected. But I think first, Marisa, we need to talk about your story and kind of give a recap of those three shows. You grew up in a challenging environment. Were you in California and in the Los Angeles area?
Yes.
And tell me what growing up was like.
Well, my parents had me when they were 15, so it was my parents come from dysfunctional families, early pregnancy, poverty, substance abuse, incarceration. You know, by the time I was 12, I knew what every drug was and how to use them. And
did your dad actually
yes,
use with you?
Yes, my father introduced me to methamphetamine when I was 12, and he just told me that I would grow up to be a drug addict just like the rest of my family. And in his head, because drug addicts don't think clearly, you know, you have a sick head, your head is sick, and you can't think in a logical way. So he thought that he was being a good father by protecting me. He didn't want me to, as he put it, get any bad dope on the streets. So he wanted me to get it from him. My father wasn't what I would consider reliable. He never once had his own place. I never had a phone number to get a hold of him. And my parents had separated when they never did get married. So they separated when they were young. Maybe, I think they lasted maybe 2 years. And my mother always did the best she could, but she too had a substance issue. And just growing up, I just had that turmoil in my life. My father couldn't love me the way that I wanted to be loved by a father. And with that, I carried, you know, a lot of issues. I didn't have any self-esteem. I didn't think that I was good enough for anything. I didn't think that I would amount to anything. And I honestly felt rejected by my father, and that caused a lot of problems within me. And so I would say that by the time I was a teenager, I think I had become really the parents to my parents at that time. And I moved out and I was homeless. And then I thought I had everything figured out. I wasn't going to do anything that my parents did, you know, because I truly didn't want to. But I didn't really realize or even have I didn't have any true support or guidance in my life. And so I ended up following in the path of my parents. You know, I got pregnant early. I had a baby, my first child at 16. I dropped out of high school. And then it was just a long line of struggling, trying to catch up in life.
Now, are you there the night your mom is arrested?
I wasn't there. I wasn't living there at the time, but I'll never forget that day. I knew that my mom wasn't doing good, and at that time we had a very horrible relationship. My mom my mom had went through a really bad divorce, and she wasn't in a good place. emotionally, and I didn't know how to help her. I couldn't really even help myself at the time. But I did know that she was in a very abusive relationship, and something horrible happened, and she shot her abuser, and she got a life sentence. I really didn't know how to deal with that. That was like a extremely large thing for a child to deal with. And so I just turned to drugs. And I intentionally stayed strung out after that for the next probably 4 years, I would say.
And then what causes you to get in your car and drive east?
Well, I actually bled to death. I ended up in the hospital, and they revived me 4 times. When you're strung out, you don't take care of yourself. And so I just ignored it for probably about a year. And then I went to sleep one night and I didn't wake up. And I woke up in the hospital. And I realized at that point that it was time to do something different. And so when I got out of the hospital, I got in my old truck and drove across the country until I got to Indiana. I barely made it here. It was a 1956 Chevy truck, and it didn't have any windows except for the windshield.
Do you still have the 56 Chevy?
I wish.
Oh.
I wish I had it. No, I don't have it. But I had to stop in every state to change the plastic on the on the windows, and I didn't have any plates on it. You know, I didn't have a license. I didn't have any insurance. I made it all the way to Indiana without getting pulled over.
And Jonathan, I want to ask you, when you hear this, and we'll get to where you come onto the scene, but does it help you see like why you end up dealing with some of the things you dealt with your mom?
Right now, I can look back and see why everything had happened, but at the time,
No way.
the background was just my parents got together, and I didn't know anything about either parent until I was like 14. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what my parents' backgrounds were. I knew that they were both drug addicts, but I had no idea where my dad came. I knew the general areas where they came from, but I had no idea what the story
The
behind
depth
it was.
and breadth of it, severity of it.
I thought my grandma was in a hotel when we went and visited her.
How old would you have been?
8 or no? 8.
No, you were like 5.
5. Okay, that helps me understand that too. So you end up in Indiana. Do you find your dad?
I don't find him. He found me.
Okay.
Yes, he found me, and that was tragic. I moved out here and I did really good. You know, I knew I wanted to get clean, and I just felt like I had nothing else in California, so I wanted a fresh start. So I moved out here, and I had no idea that my dad lived out here. He found me, and I told him I was clean, and he didn't like when I got clean. He actually hated when I got clean. So he brought me some dope, and
That's the way he connected with you, was to get you using again with him.
yes.
We're going to fast forward a little bit, but how do you meet Jonathan's dad?
Well, my dad was a drug dealer, and I actually he was friends with my dad. Jonathan's dad was friends with my dad, and that's how we met.
And so do you meet using, both of you using?
Oh, definitely, yes.
And then how does that relationship transpire? Jonathan comes along. Are you using at that point as parents?
Well, when we found out that we were pregnant, we stopped using. But my father didn't want me to stop, even though I was pregnant. So he kept pounding on the door. You know, he would be pounding on the door, and I would have everything locked up, trying to just I literally lock myself in my house and put a bunch of blankets over the windows so that I could stay away from, because everybody I knew was high, And so he would be outside pounding on the door saying that he had some really good dope, let him in. And so one night, Jonathan's father and I just packed up all of our stuff in the middle of the night and moved to Indianapolis.
What steps do you take to try to have a new life?
Well, what got me clean was that we found out we were pregnant, and I remember thinking, we're not in a place to have a child. This is horrible. Like, what? I'm a horrible person right now, and we don't have a good life. And so I remember thinking to myself, what can I do to change? I've tried everything. I thought I had tried everything. And so I remember the one thing I didn't try was going to church. And Jonathan's grandparents they were devout Christians, and they were the only Christians I'd ever known in my whole life. And so I remember asking them, will you take me to church with you? And I was really nervous because I didn't know if I was allowed to go to church. I thought I would get kicked out of church. I didn't have a good last name in this town, and I was nervous that anybody would find out. And so, because I didn't really realize how it was. And I remember going to church, and from
you
the
didn't
minute...
realize you would be accepted.
Yes. And from the minute that I walked in, I knew that was what I'd been looking for my whole life. There was this missing piece in my life, and I had just found it. And from that moment on, I was clean.
And you surrender your life to Christ.
Yes.
You have a tremendous career. You're making money. Your husband, is he doing well too? Is he clean at that time as well?
No.
Okay. So you're actually teaching, you end up teaching Sunday school, right?
Yes, I became very involved in church.
And how many years are you clean and sober and involved in the church?
For almost 10.
10 years. And do you remember that, Jonathan, growing
Yes.
up in that church and everything, your grandparents?
Yes, I remember everything, and the whole time my dad was I still knew what drug addiction looked like because my dad was still really bad into it.
And then is it one night or one day that your husband convinces you to use again?
Yes.
And you're battling with, I want to honor my husband, I want to submit to my husband, with, I don't want to have that life again, and I know if I start using, I'm an addict, and I can't
Yes.
go down that road. And you finally succumb, right?
Yeah, the problem is when you start your relationship off, as two drug addicts, sometimes if only one of you gets clean, then you have to find your new
Identity?
yes.
Your new connection?
And his father didn't marry a clean and sober Christian girl, and that wasn't what he wanted to be married to. And so there was always this turmoil in our relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And I, as a Christian, didn't want to divorce him because I believed, that I had faith that he would one day come to the realization that I did. But at the same time, I wanted to raise my children in church, and I wanted to raise my children in a different way that I had been raised. And I recognized a lot of my mistakes. And so I totally gave my life to God. And while I was growing deep in the Lord and my relationship with Him, my marriage was falling apart. And I hung on for several years, not realizing, because I didn't have anybody in my life that was a Christian and also in recovery. And I think that's a really important thing, because for someone who doesn't understand addiction, it's not good for someone to stay in a relationship with an active user if you're in recovery, because you're playing with fire and you're going to relapse.
Mm-hmm. So you guys end up being, or is your husband the cook, or are you the cook?
No, I divorced their dad,
Uh-huh.
my children's dad, and then I got remarried to another addict. And I chose to, he treated me so well in every other area that I had never really been treated like that before in my life from any man. And so I chose to ignore the fact that he was an active alcoholic.
Now, is Jonathan living with you? Are you living with her,
No.
Jonathan?
I lived with her and her husband in first grade, and they got separated when I was 7. And I lived with my dad ever since they got separated.
We had a custody battle for 2 years. And during that time, I couldn't afford to do it any longer because I had the children living with me. I had been a housewife for so long, and I was working insane hours just to make it. I had 3 children in daycare, and I wasn't getting any help. So we finally, he won the custody battle because I didn't have enough money to keep fighting.
And he had family here too. Mom didn't have any family. She had moved from California and she had 0 family out here.
And he had a network of
And
people
he
to
had
help,
a network.
including your grandparents who were awesome.
Yes.
So he took the kids from me and gave them to his mom. And that was very painful for me because I wanted my kids really bad. And it was, to me, just a way to hurt me, and it was hurting the kids too. Learning to lose my kids was something that was very difficult for me, and that just kind of, from there, things spun out of control for me.
And you go from the Sunday school teacher to the meth addict, and are you using heroin still, or do you go from heroin to meth?
At the end of my addiction, I had an insane meth and heroin addiction.
And you eventually, is it your husband who's the cook at that time?
Yes.
So you guys, you're the cook, you're users, addicts, and you get arrested. You get arrested for dealing,
Yes.
I assume. And you're taken to the local jail, and you shut down the telephone system because everybody's calling, wanting to know when you're going to be out. Is that right?
Yes. They got bombarded with phone calls.
And there's a 4-year period where you're disconnected totally. Is that right, from Jonathan?
Yes.
Yes.
And I assume you're not happy at all about that.
I had a 2.5-year younger sister throughout this whole period. And we were waiting on her, and she said that she was on her way to come and get us. And we hadn't gotten in contact the whole day. And then from there on out, for 4 years, I never gotten any contact from her.
And had you intended to go see them, or were you just talking?
No, I intended to go. That's the epitome of what addiction does to someone. I was I was at the worst stage of my whole life as far as my addiction goes. I had hit complete rock bottom, and I missed my children dearly, and I wanted to stay away from them because I didn't want them to go through to witness the things I had witnessed as a child. So it was my way of protecting them, but I tried so hard to keep my word. But when you're in your addiction, you mean well, like you mean what you're saying.
Right.
But I was trying to come see them, but it's chaos. Your life is chaos. I didn't make it. I didn't have enough money to get gas. I didn't have, they were 4.5 hours away. My car was junky.
So how do you end up in Fort Wayne in Judge Wendy Davis's court?
Well, I had gotten arrested in Kosciuszko County, and I did almost 9 months in there. And when I went in front of the judge there, I was facing 38 years in prison. And he gave me time served and told me that he was sending me to Allen County to face my probation violation. And so I knew from there that I was definitely going to go to prison when I got here, because you can't, I was on probation for a D felony, and when I got arrested, I caught an A, a B, and 2 D felony charges. And so that was, I was definitely going to go to prison for that. And when I went in front of Judge Davis, she told me that she had other plans for me. And I remember when I was at my lowest, I had become suicidal because I just had nothing to live for. I was a woman with nothing left to live for. And I remember begging God to either let me die or send me to prison, because I had literally called every rehabilitation center in the state, and I couldn't find help because I didn't have money and I didn't have insurance and I didn't have family that could help me with that. And it just wasn't available. And so when I went in front of Judge Davis, I remember when she told me she had other plans for me and that she was sending me to the Redemption House, I knew that I was getting the help that God had asked me for, that I'd asked God for several months before that.
And when do you like recommit your life to Christ? I assume you're detoxed at that point. And do you do that in the Redemption House? Does it happen in jail? Where does that recommitment happen for you?
That happened when I was in jail, during the 9 months I was in jail. I knew that God saved my life, and I knew that that was the end of my addiction. I was ready. I was ready to completely change, and I did completely surrender my life to God.
What's amazing is you're now director of operations of,
Yes.
of the Redemption House. Well, you reconnect with Jonathan. I'd like you to describe that.
Okay, when I first got out of jail, I lost everything when I went to jail. I lost my car, my clothes, my home, my bank account, my furniture, all my paperwork, you name it, I lost it. I literally had my purse. And with that being said, I didn't have anybody's phone numbers. I didn't even have my own children's phone number. That's how low I got. I didn't even have a way to get a hold of my own children. And so I remember Facebooking all 3 of my children and sending them a message.
Did you get that message?
Yes.
And
I did.
Jonathan was actually my first child to call me. And he told me, he said, "Mom, I love you, and I'm going to sleep better tonight, and I'm glad that you're alive, but I don't have anything else to say to you."
Mm. Yeah, at that time, you're probably still hurting, mad.
Well, not really. I was the most hurt. I was in 6th grade whenever Mom left completely. And in 8th grade, I learned that she had gotten arrested. And as soon as I learned that she got arrested, I thought 2 things. 1, I'm never gonna have a mom again, because I haven't had a mom anyways for the last 2 years, and now she's in jail, which makes it worse. And 2, I was just the most hurt out of any time I've ever been hurt in my life. So I just really mourned on it until I got to the point to where I accepted it. Because at a certain point, I couldn't think about it anymore. I had to say, whatever, it's over. I'm just gonna have to move forward in my life, and I'm just not gonna have a mom. So when she got out of jail, she texted me, and I told her, I spoke to her one time and said, I'm done, this is it. I love you, and I'm glad you're alive, but I can't talk to you anymore. And I didn't talk to her for a long time after that.
And then
probably a year.
What causes you to reconnect?
My sister probably. My sister saying we need to talk to Mom. And at this point, I mean, throughout this whole year, I'm not talking to Mom after I talked to her after she got out of jail. My sister was talking to her, because my sister's a lot more accepted. Like she just doesn't care. She just like, okay, it's my mom, yay. Me, on the other hand, I was way more attentive to what had happened and cautious. Plus, I got a lot of bad feedback from my dad. A lot.
So a year
I didn't
after,
stop trying. I
kept trying.
continued to, yeah. And I told him, I understand that you're mad and I expect you to be, but I'm going to keep trying and I'll show you.
And you reconnect and you have a good relationship today, and your mom reconnects with you as well?
Yes, my mom, throughout all this, my mom was released from prison. The California changed a lot of the laws, and so all these women have been set free from prison for women who have been convicted of murdering their abusers. And so my mom was released from prison, and she was sentenced to a transitional home. And she got out of the transitional home, and she's doing amazing. She's just doing so amazing.
And you've reconnected with her as well?
Yes, I did.
Wow.
Yes.
You got a mom and a grandma.
Yes.
What are you going to do for a career?
I'm in the military right now.
You're in the Army?
Yes.
Praise the Lord. That is awesome. And
Yes.
what are you doing in the Army?
I'm just in the National Guard. I'm in the infantry.
And where do you plan to go with that, do you think?
It's just gonna take me wherever. I'm just gonna ride out my National Guard years and see where I want to go after that.
Well, thank you so much for your service. And Marisa, thank you so much for sharing your amazing story. I mean, God has done some of his best work in you, and it's paying forward to the next generation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Just like the physical heart has 4 chambers, so the spiritual heart is comprised of 4 chambers, and you can remember it in the acronym WISE. W is the will. It's the chamber of our choices. The intellect is the mind, or the chamber of our thoughts. S is spirit. It's the lead chamber of our prayers. And E is emotions. It represents the chamber of our feelings. So to humble ourselves to God, in order to experience wisdom, we need to choose to, think to, pray to, and want to. Learn this lesson and see it unpacked and made practical in your copy of Street Smarts from Proverbs, and learn how to navigate through conflict to community.